personally, but his nephew was my very best friend. And I met the Don of Dons through my friend when my friend and I went to borrow money from him. It was, my father was the same way. I knew these people, but I never
Did you get the money?
had anything to do with them. The phone's ringing. Not to, maybe another 3, 4, 5 months.
Right.
Go ahead.
I'll work fast.
What do you want to know?
Where did, like when Mom and Pop would go on a vacation?
Oh, all right. Get back to Homestead. Through one of the cab drivers, a guy named Charlie Caputo, whose 2 younger brothers later on were very big in the mafia down around Cherry Street and Mulberry Street and or Mott Street in downtown New York. They were real big wheels in that thing. I know that. Charlie Neary got in trouble with the underworld. And not Charlie Neary, Charlie Caputo got in trouble with the underworld. And he disappeared. He ran away. Where he ran to was Homestead, Pennsylvania. He had a German wife, I don't remember her name, but he had a German wife who came from that area. And the wind-up was that Charlie wound up with about a mile square of property up there, a beautiful farm that I used to go to in the summertime. I'd spend the whole summer up there. I really had a wonderful time. I'd help him with the farming. I used to drive the horses in the hay wagon. I used to help him cut corn. I used to help him with the cows. I milked cows. And when I wanted to go swimming, they had the most beautiful stream with a big pond in it that I loved, except for one thing. I was deathly afraid of a big pickerel they had there. They had a fish about 3 feet long. And they looked fish as hell. They got big mouths. They scared the hell out of me. So I used to make sure there was no fish there when I go swimming. I throw rocks in and everything else. But the water was beautifully clean and cold and refreshing. It was drinking water. I used to go swimming in that. Well, that's where we used to go. Through Charlie, Pop made a connection with a guy who owned a hotel in a place called the Four Corners. The Four Corners was a diverging route that went from someplace between Homestead and Milford, Pennsylvania, or Hawley, Pennsylvania. That's on the same route. That diversion route would also, where this fork in the road was, the four corners, had another road that would take you to Beach Lake and then to Ellenville. You go across the river, I guess Susquehanna River, or whatever river is there, take you to Ellenville, which was Liberty and all that area. Now, Beach Lake was a little resort, too. They opened up a Homestead airport right near Charlie Caputo's property. They bought about 1/4 mile square of his property, and then to build a road through there, a state road through there, to build the airport and everything, they bought sand from him and the rest of his property. The wind-up was he became a very wealthy man. His only worry was with the New York people find out where he was. The only one that knew was his brothers, of course, and Pop. Pop was doing business with this guy, Pete Mouseheart. Pete Mouseheart owned the hotel. And I remember...
What hotel?
I don't know the name of it. I guess it was the Four Corners Hotel or something like that. It was right outside of Homestead, Pennsylvania. And we used to make the whiskey. We lived on... I think we lived on 13... I'm not sure where we lived. I don't remember where we lived. But it was the late 20s. Oh, I do remember. We lived on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn on President Street, a corner house. Why I remember suddenly is because in 1927, that's when Pop went out for a pack of cigarettes, and then 2 days later we got a telegram sending me money. I'm in Miami. That's also a place where, for Christmas, I got electric trains, and Mom burned herself. She burned her legs on one of those Zero burners, the Therno cans of fluid that spilled on her while it was lit, and she got very badly burned. It's also the place where I was the only Jewish kid on the block, and nobody knew my name, because when they come and call me, they stand outside the window and yell, "Hey, Jew boy! Hey, Jew boy!" if my mother had said Harold, they wouldn't know who the hell they was talking about. Which I'm just as happy. Harold wasn't too great a name. But that was about 1927. I remember one of the kids' name was Kirby. They were all Irish kids. It was predominantly Irish neighborhood. And how I know it was 1927 was one of the places that Pop used to get alcohol from was a drugstore on the corner of Prospect Place and Bedford Avenue. At that time, it was a very nice white area. Now it's predominantly black and Hispanic, and I know it's run down. I've been there 20 years ago and it was very bad. But the name of the drugstore owner was, the name of the drug was a guy named Ralph Gallowin. And I know that the night of the Dempsey-Tunney long count fight, we were in that store listening to it on the radio. So if you know the date of that fight, you know where I was that night with my father.
You mentioned that you lived in Harlem for a while.
Yeah.
How long did you live in Harlem, and what was it like then?
Well, Pop had a bar and grill, a Landmark Inn, on the corner of LaSalle Street and Amsterdam Avenue.
What year is this about?
This is 1934 and 5.
So I'm alive then.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
3 years
You were a
old.
little bit. You were a little kid. You were about 2, 3 years old. He had it on a corner. That was called Manhattanville. It was the white section of Harlem. It was predominantly Polish and Irish. Across the street was a butter and egg store where you walk in if you wanted to buy butter. They had the big tubs in a glass case. You cut out a pound of butter for you, and by golly, what he cut out was right on the button. It was never deviated from a pound by a 20th of an ounce. It was always right on the button. You could buy Swiss cheese, you cut off a piece of whatever. You want the quarter pound, it was a quarter of a pound. If you wanted cottage cheese, he took out, boom, he throws, you want the quarter, you wanted the third, you want the 3/8. They always had it exact. They knew how to do it.
But that wasn't at all.
It was remarkable. That part of Harlem was white. But black Harlem was very nice. Pop had the bar and grill then, and I was about 14. 1934. I was 15 already. And if I wanted money, Pop said go to register and take it. So I could take any amount I wanted. And after $5, I was rich in those days. And I used to take what I wanted, and I go to over the black section where all the prostitutes were. Every house was a whorehouse, and for half a buck I get laid. I could really get good stuff for $1. Now, also, Pop used to throw all the hustlers out. I guess because Mom insisted on it. But when he used to go away, and I used to be in charge of the place, I used to let them in. Because they used to let me go to their places afterwards.
So you were 15 years old and you could be in charge of a bar?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, at that time, one day, a good-looking woman came in. She sat down at the table. We didn't have a liquor license. All we had was a beer license. And she sat down at the table. She asked for beer, and then I served her. And she said to me, can I have a highball? So I said, yeah, I don't know. I went over to Pop, who was in the little kitchen we had. We had a tiny little kitchen. And he was busy making free lunches because you used to have free lunches. My God, their free lunches are like what you go out and spend $10 for today. You get a schooner of beer for a nickel. You walk over to the lunch counter. You had sardines, ham, meatballs, boiled eggs, liverwurst, bologna, bread, rolls, pickles, relish, whatever you wanted. That went with that 5-cent glass of beer.
How could you make money on that?
They made money. They made money. Now, Pop was in there making up whatever he was doing. It was the afternoon, late afternoon. So I went over there, hey, Pop, that lady wants a highball. I said, all right. He looked her over. Yeah, give her one. So I got a shot of rye, mixed it with ginger ale, brought it over to it, ice, a little mixer. She drank it. She took her time, waited maybe 10, 15 minutes. Come here, sonny. I came over again. I was a big kid. She brought me back. I was as big as I am now at 15. I weighed 155 pounds then. So she says, can I have another one? I said, yeah. And I got it, and I brought it back, laid it on the table. She paid me whatever it was, $1.35, I don't remember. And she says, you the boss's son? I said, yeah. She said, is that the boss? Yeah. Tell your father I want to talk to him. I went over to Pop. Hey, Pop, the lady wants to talk to you. He walks over, he says, what is it? She says, you want to take the rap, or you want me to take your son? He says, I'll take it. And she gave him the summons, and I don't remember whether she arrested him then and there or not. I don't recall. But the wind-up was, he did have to go to court. But he was his own lawyer, and he got himself off. He never went to jail because he was a phenomenal Philadelphia lawyer. He was the guy they named it after. If his nephews, who later were attorneys, and were attorneys at that time, wanted advice about the law, they asked him. He was brilliant, without ever having been a lawyer. And he got himself off of that rap, too. He never went to jail.
Weren't, at that time, were Nat and Saul and all those people involved in politics at that point? Did they have any clout?
No, Nat was known as the mayor of 2nd Avenue. He was politically involved, not actually as a politician, but because he served the politicians. So anybody who wanted a favor done would go to Nat. Now, Nat owned the Sacramento wine store on 6th Street, just east of 6th Avenue. In those days, since Prohibition was in effect, you weren't able to buy whiskey or anything in that kind legally. But Sacramento wine, that's something else. That's a holy wine. They need that for rabbinical services and everything. So he had a Sacramento wine store with a little bit of booze on the side, like maybe 100 or 200 or 300 cases a week. And who would buy from him? The fellow that I remember named Bert Stamp, who was a Tammany Hall, the head of Tammany Hall at that time, a job that later other guys, big men got. Bert Stamp, I remember, but he was very big in Tammany Hall, which of course was the political rocket place. All those politicians are a bunch of phonies. However, through Tammany, Danny Weiss became a judge. I don't know if we should be talking about this, but you can edit what you think is necessary. Danny Weiss became a judge. He was a judge up until a year ago when I was in New York. Whether he retired since then, I don't know. He must be 70 at least. And but he had like a lifetime job. He was a councilman when Wagner was mayor, and Wagner wanted to get rid of somebody. The only way he could get rid of them was to get other councilmen to vote with him. Danny Weiss went against the others and went with Wagner. As a result, he was promised a judgeship. Now, when Wagner's first wife died, he remarried. The day that he remarried, that morning, before he got married, before his wedding, he called Danny Weiss, had Danny Weiss come down to City Hall, I suppose, and he swore him in as a county judge. But from what I understand, Danny was a good judge. I had an experience with Danny. It was very funny. Showed you that even though he was a judge, what he was like when the roads weren't on, how much of a down-to-earth street guy he was. In the middle 60s, I guess it was, I went to visit him. I was a subway conductor, and I was working downtown at City Hall. I had a lunch break for about an hour, so I wanted to see my cousin, the judge, in action. So I went to the courthouse, which is 53 Word Street, I think. It's right across, right behind City Hall. So they weren't in session then. He was in his chambers checking on something. They had a recess because he had to check on the law, and he didn't want to change anything. He didn't want to have his ruling thrown out of court. So he had to go by due process, and he checked the book. I went to the back, and I asked, could I see Judge Weiss? And the attendant said, who are you? I said, I'm his cousin. He went, cousin Harold. He went to the judge okayed him. The attendant says, go ahead in. I went in, Danny was sitting there, in his, no shirt, no robe on, his clothes, his shirt on, and he's reading the law book. I says, how you doing, Dan? Okay, what's bringing you down? Hey, let's see it work. He said, I got to check this ruling. He says, I can't make a ruling on it. I don't want to change what's already been done. They'll throw it out or whatever. While I was there, as a knock on the door, the attendant says, Your Honor, I have a policeman here. He wants to have a search warrant. He wants you to sign a search warrant. All right, send him in. So this cop comes in, and Danny says to him, what is it, officer? He says, Your Honor, I'd like that. Lieutenant so-and-so sent me for this search warrant. Would you sign it? Danny took it and read it. He says, what are you trying to do to me? You want to send me to jail? I can't send this. This isn't legal. What the hell kind of a horse is this? Sent you here with this. So the kind of sun is shining right in that thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad we changed our position. The seat isn't as comfortable as the other one, but I guess you got more light. So Danny says to the guy, who the hell gave you this? I'll go to jail if I sign it. He says, well, to the cop says, but Your Honor, Lieutenant so-and-so gave it to me. He says, well, look, officer, I know you're only an errand boy. And really, he put the cop down. He must have, he says, I'm not yelling at you. He says, you go back and tell that son of a bitch that he better straighten this thing out if he wants me to sign it. If he does it right, I might sign it. Well, of course he had put down the cop by calling him an errand boy. So the cop is heading out to the door, and as he's ready to close the door, he says, thank you, Your Honor. Then he says, fuck you too. He heard it just like I heard it. But the cop said, thank you. But then he heard what I heard. Right. That shows you what judges are like. I'm trying to go back in funny memories.
So, when did you first meet Yoli? And how old were you? What circumstances?
I was about 18. No, I was 19 when I met.
Well, what were you before then? What were you doing? Like, when was your first steady job?
My first steady job was for Stone Wright Studios. That was on 17th Street and 4th Avenue in New York. I think it was 21 4th Avenue, I'm not sure. It was the largest, at that time, and probably today, the largest commercial photography studio in the country.
I bet you it doesn't even exist.
What's that?
I bet you it doesn't even exist today.
Oh, yes, it does.
Does, don't it?
Absolutely. It's the top floor of that Amalgamated Woolen Building, or American Woolen Building, on 16th Street and 4th Avenue. They had as their customers Sears Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, Spiegel Mail Order, Chicago Mail Order, any mail order house, you name it. They were part of it. They did all the way. I met the most beautiful women in the world while working for that outfit. I was what they call a merchandise clerk. I loved the job. I really did. I had a nice boss. I had a guy named Jack Green, who was like a father to me. He was so nice. And this was 1937 and 1938, right after I got out of school. I was making $25 a week, plus overtime, and if I worked overtime, I could call downstairs to a very nice lounge, the Southern, which is still there on 4th Avenue, across the street from Union Square Park. They send us up hot turkey dinners with anything we wanted to drink. All I had to do was sign a tab. The studio would pay for it. Besides working and getting overtime at the same time. So I used to average about $50 a week. This was in 1937 and 8. That was like $500 or $600 a week today. I loved it. My job was, as a merchandise clerk, when a garment would come in from a mail order house that had to be photographed. The garment would come in by U.S. mail, parcel, however. I would get it. It would have a note on what page and what number, catalog number this was of the catalog book. Like, let's say it was article number 204A on page 67 of the catalog, of Sears catalog. I had a little label that I have a wire attached to. I'd write down with page 67, 205, whatever, tie it to the article. We had big plastic boxes, and let's say it was bras and girdles. I'd get maybe a dozen of each at a time. It would entail 3 or 4 pages of artwork. Models had to put these on and be photographed in it. I would follow these articles from the delivery to the gallery, where the dressing room where the girls would put it on. After they were photographed, I would bring the articles to the artist, who would bring out the finer details of it by looking at the photograph and looking at the work on the object. They would bring out the details. They had these blow artists that would blow out things. They made, if a girl had a little bit of fat on her, they smooth it out, whatever. I loved the job. Why I loved it? Because I was a piece of the furniture there. When I would go into the dressing room with bathing suits or bras or girdles, I'd knock on the door. There'd be 3 or 4 of the most gorgeous women in the world working in there, anywhere from 18 up to 30. I'd knock on the door. I'd say, "Who's there?" "Harold." "Oh, come on in." And I'd walk in. I'd find all these broads bare-ass naked. I was there 2 years. I still had bulging eyes when I walked out. As a matter of fact, one of the funniest things ever happened to me that I've told dozens of times to different people, probably you a dozen times too, was as much as I saw of them, it was never enough. So one day I had brought in bathing suits. I knew the girls were going to be changing into bathing suits. I went to my office, which was a little down the hall. Now, all these dressing rooms and galleries were separated by these plaster boards, maybe 7 feet high. And you had a corridor go in and out. My office was about maybe 30 or 40 feet down from where the dressing room was. So I went to my office, and I got up on a table, and I stood on the table, and I'm looking over the top of this wall-separated divider into the mirror of the dressing room, and by doing that, I could see all the girls. I had a great time. But one evening, after having done that, I was walking through the corridor, and I had a box in my hand, and one of the girls, her name was Minerva Sorden. She was the Dr. Lyons toothpaste ad girl of 1937 or 8. One of the most popular faces in the country at that time. The corridors were very narrow, so I moved over into the corner to get out of her way with my box. And I'm over in the corner, and she leaned over, and she put her hands on my chest, and she leaned against my chest and says, "Ooh, how our heart is beating." I said, "Minerva, many of you had me like that, your heart would be beating. If I had you like that, your heart would be beating fast too." So she says, "Harold, I'm only stopping you for one reason." I said, "What's that?" She says, "I want to tell you, if you're going to stand up on a table or chair or whatever you're standing on to look over the walls," she says, "make sure there isn't a light behind you, because with your ears, nobody could miss you." That's a true story. I love that job. I was going with Yoli when I met that job. I mean, I met Yoli when I was working there. In my eye, Yoli was more beautiful than any of those girls. Not in my eye. I think she was really that beautiful. It's just she wasn't as photogenic as they were. She had no desire to be a model, but she was 5'6". She weighed 114 pounds. She had legs nicer than any of those models, and I compared them many times. I met her, and we went together for we went together a short time. How I met her was, I used to go to Brooklyn all the time to see my friends, even though I lived in the Bronx. Every weekend I would go to Brooklyn. And it was on a 4th of July holiday that the WPA used to have shows. They have all these out-of-work actors give shows on a moving, a big truck that had a stage on it. Now, about 2 weekends before, on a Sunday morning, I was standing on a corner with my friends on the corner of 18th Street and Avenue U, and I saw two girls walk by. I fell in love immediately with one of them. They were wearing riding outfits, and the one that I was attracted to had beautiful brown hair with bangs and big brown eyes and nice, beautiful cheeks, beautiful skin. And as she passed by, I saw the cutest ass I've ever seen. Nice legs. She had riding joppers on, boots. But I could tell, because I had X-ray vision, she was gorgeous. But she just had walked by me. She said, "Oh," to one of the guys that kept on going. And I said to the guy, "Hey, who's that?" He says, "Don't fool around with them. That's nice stuff. Their brothers will kill you. Besides, there's nothing doing with them anyway." Okay. 2 weeks later, which was the 4th of July, we're at this park, Kelly Park on Avenue S and 14th Street, right by the subway tracks. They had elevated tracks there. Who comes along but this girl with a couple of her girlfriends, and I'm with a couple of my boyfriends, and one of my friends knows one of her girlfriends. Through them, Yoli and I were introduced, and I wound up taking her home. I was a big-time spender then, and I bought her an ice cream bar for a nickel, which also happened to be my nickel car fare to go home. But I made a big impression. And the other thing that she tells everybody about our first meeting, when I walked her home, she lived in a private house on Avenue U, on 18th Street, off Avenue T. Had a big house. And I said, "Which is your room?" And she said, "That one up there, the one with the moonlight on it." I said, "Oh, lucky moon, shining into your room on you." Corny as hell, but it made a big impression on her. I guess I had read it in one of my dirty stories that I read quite frequently.
Romeo had tried it a few years
but
before
maybe,
you.
well, whatever. Pretty close to it, but I wasn't thinking Romeo. It was probably one of the detective stories or Argosy that I read at that time. And I wound up going with Yoli for about, I took her out maybe 4 or 5 times. I couldn't make any headway, so I said to hell with him. I stopped seeing her, as nice as I thought she was. I had other things on my mind. I didn't see her for several months. And then one day, I was coming down the avenue, and I passed the sisters Clara and Enos. And they gave me a nice greeting, and I did them. And Clara said to me, "Why don't you come to my birthday party?" I said, "Sure, send me a written invitation." And she did. She didn't know I was being sarcastic. That's how sweet she was. And I wound up going to the party alone. Yoli was there with another guy. But before the party was over, I made a date with her. And that was around the middle of July. No, as a matter of fact, that was the following March. I hadn't seen her in several months, like maybe 8 months or so. The following March, I met her. Met the sister. We had the party, and I went with her. And then in November, that November, I became engaged to her, and I married her. Mom never knew that I was engaged until afterwards. I came home, and I said, "Mom, I want to let you know I'm going to get married." I met a girl, in love with her, we're engaged, I love her. I said, "Who, what, when, where?" I said, "Well, she's a shikser, and I didn't want you to know." She says, "But can I meet her?" I said, "Sure." "When?" And we made an appointment, like for the following Sunday. Yoli came there, and up until, this is December 1984, up until December last year, 1983, Mom remembered very vividly that first meeting with Yoli. She recounted it to us, telling us what Mom wore, what she said, how frightened she was, and how sorry Mom felt for her that she was in love with me. And she told us that she's stupid. She don't know what she's getting herself into.